So we're going to talk about coaching for a strength-based culture. In particular, what we're going to have a look at is just a conversation about what do we mean by strengths, really? What is a strength-based culture? Some of the personal strength concepts and the business advantage of that. Really, then looking at kind of the role of personality in that whole process, the concept of conscious flexibility when we understand ourselves and how do we flex into and develop ourselves in particular circumstances, and then looking at some of the myths around those strength-based cultures as well. And then we've got a handout that we'll send out to you, an ebook on some of the strategies on how you can implement that and strategies for leaders as well. So a lot to get through. We'll see how we go. Please just ask questions, pop your hand up, or call out as you go along. Really happy just for you to engage as much as you like. My first question, though, I suppose, just as a group, is what do we mean by strengths? And then therefore, what do we mean by strength-based culture? So interested in your point of view, and maybe I'll stop sharing and put people back onto gallery, and we can have a quick conversation.
I think there's that broad sweep of strengths around the behavioural aspect right through to the technical. So I think sometimes people get mixed up about what are we what kind of strengths are we talking about? And I think that's an important point to make.
Hmm.
So you can think about somebody's experiences, somebody's skills, somebody's expertise. They can be considered strengths. But I think in
Hmm.
our realm, it's more about how do you demonstrate those? How do you bring those to the fore? How do use those to your own advantage? And how prominent are they? I think that's the kind of landscape I try to make sure that we clarify and get that clear about what kind of strength are we talking about. I think
Hmm.
is important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. What about others? What's your view on strengths?
I would add to that, Rob. I completely agree, and apologies. I would have my video on if it was working. But I'm finding my clients at the moment are really pushing back on this concept of soft skills. That terminology's been around for a long time,
Hmm.
and I think the realization is if they're soft, are they easier? And we're learning actually these are the most difficult skills compared to that technical piece, Rob, as you mentioned. We can send you off on a course and we can teach you technical skills and you'll pick those up. But behavioural change and learning, particularly understanding where your starting point is in that whole self-awareness space, is much harder than people had thought. And that's where we fit. That's where we step in.
Hmm. And it's interesting, we do call them soft skills. I'd probably call them more essential skills than soft skills, or just human skills, as opposed to the type of skill that we typically build, filling a gap or that development gap that we often associate with building skill more generally in organizations. Richard or David, Elizabeth, Monica, what's your experience?
Something that's coming up a fair bit for us, Grant, is
Mm.
around psychological safety.
Right.
So just having an organization where people feel comfortable that they can share and talk about culture and what it means to them, and that they're not withholding stuff. Seem to be a little bit more scared about contributing and sharing things unless they feel that they're in a safe environment in which to do so.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. David?
Typically, if you ask me about strength-based coaching, I'd probably go reaching the shelves for my Martin Seligman and positive psychology.
Yeah.
And that's the association I have with strength-based coaching is that, it came out of positive coaching,
Mm.
positive psychology, but I'm not sure about that. It's not something I have expertise in.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the concept of strengths. I mean, I think the concept more generally around development has always been filling a gap or fixing an issue that we've got. I grew up in that professional environment where leveraging your strengths was often sometimes, or talking about your strengths was kind of bragging. And it's like, making yourself out to be bigger than you actually are, because development has always been about that negative state or that dysfunction or disease state, which is fixing the gap that we've got. We're not doing something that we need to do, or we need to do something better. I think really what we're talking about from a strength-based perspective, and yes, it is influenced certainly from the PERMA model out of Seligman and the positive psychology movement, is talking about understanding ourselves, where we flex from, creating that conscious flexibility, looking at development from a strength-based perspective. And that could just be challenging ourselves to use our strengths and skills in a different way than we're already using them, and to really understand then the gap between where we're at and what's required maybe in our role or in our relationship. And then how do we fill that gap as well? How do we leverage what we already do well, but also understanding that sometimes that doing well, maybe not just quite enough, but it's a bit more conscious in the approach that we're taking. Monica or Elizabeth, would you add anything there?
Well, we mostly use motivational interviewing in our area of work. So
Hmm.
that's like basically the strength that we have is like we basically let them express themselves and talk, and we
Yeah.
do what is the 80-20, where they speak 80% and we just answer 20% of the time.
Yeah.
So I don't
Okay.
know.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Okay, let me go back to sharing some my slides. So when we're talking about strengths, we're talking about in our context, our facet 5 context, we're talking about those inherent traits or behaviors and patterns that positively influence our actions and our interactions. The things that kind of motivate us and energize us and drive us. Those things are probably a bit more easily accessible to us, and we would say probably a little bit more effortless than effortful. We would say that they're rooted in the stable aspects of our personality and provide a solid foundation for helping us achieve our goals, build better relationships, and overcome challenges. We would, the work that we're doing more, we're talking about more about self-efficacy and those micro moments that allow individuals to demonstrate that build self-confidence and self-worth through that process. And that we're also kind of then recognizing our personality strengths, that they can enhance both our personal and professional effectiveness. And we always talk about in our bylines, the way of helping people realize their true potential. So we're starting with ourselves. We're starting with what drives us, what motivates us, as Elizabeth said, what we do and where we come from naturally. Doesn't mean that we're always turning up well or that we've got a natural skill around that. We still have to polish some of those. They don't always turn up in the best way. But it's a way of us understanding where we are and how we can flex our style in order to be more effective, as we say, both personally and professionally. So when we have a look then, what does a strength-based culture start to emphasize? It really starts to look at taking a more empowering approach for individuals. So creating that level of self-awareness, helping people understand and identify their key traits that really drive them and motivate them and energize them. And what it then helps individuals to do is kind of understand where they're working from. They're working from a base of natural talent and confidence. So it's allowing individuals to position themselves and then understand, actually, what do I do well? What are those things that I naturally attend to more easily, those effortless moments, those things that energize me and motivate me as well? I think when we have that, we tend to find ourselves um, leaning into challenges a little bit more easily. We're a little bit more resilient around those. We're building easier resilience. We're building easier self-efficacy around those as well. From that, then people are a bit more informed and willing to take more informed risks and explore new ideas because they're working from that base of confidence. I'm not saying that all risks pay off, but it certainly helps when shifting from being more cautious into being more informed and willingness to take those risks in those sort of new spaces and explore those new ideas. that can increase kind of the focus around innovation and creativity, due to that increased confidence as well. And we spoke about before around you, Richard mentioned psychological safety as a construct. Now, all of these require that, and they all kind of have this symbiotic relationship, I think, in that when we are able to work from that base of natural confidence and natural talent. We're a bit more informed in the risks, we're a bit more open, we're a bit more willing to communicate who we are and what we like. Then we do create that psychological safety for others. We create an authentic moment around us turning up. And that then creates the environment in which we can be more creative, that we can be more innovative, that we increase confidence in our approach. Then obviously, because we're working from that place of confidence and motivation, we're making work more enjoyable and generally less draining. We do spend a lot of time at work, so it's often nice to be able to know that we come into work, we're enjoying the company of people we work with, and we feel like we're doing something of value. And not only that, I think we use the concept that we feel like we've been seen. We get to be seen for who we are and what we contribute, and not so much what our role is, but us as individuals within that. And, a big focus these days is obviously around mental health and job satisfaction. I think these are kind of outcomes for me from the other aspects when we are doing something we love or doing something that we are working from our natural talents. We feel more confident, we feel more able at work and empowered at work. Then actually, I think our general well-being and our mental health, not only at work, but at home, because work and home are harder to separate these days with a lot of remote working. And then we're getting increased job satisfaction. And that tends to then lead to a more vibrant and dynamic culture. I think also, from a productivity perspective, we're getting more discretionary effort out of individuals. They're more willing to kind of step into spaces with other people, whether that's in challenging spaces, in collaboration, in managing conflict, all of those sort of areas, because people are more appreciative of other people's styles. And I think that's what we're trying to encourage here through a strength-based approach. And then we get to, improving relationships through understanding. We understand ourselves. We're creating this moment of connection with other people. I think it's about then realizing the strengths that other people have through their approach, but not only just in their personality, obviously, but their collective skills and experience and knowledge that they bring into the workplace as well. So when we understand ourselves in order to understand others, then we have a stronger connection with people. We're more likely to display altruistic behaviors and be more empathetic, particularly around mistakes and around disagreements and resolving issues as well. We're looking past the person and we're looking back to the situation at hand and how do we best approach that. And finally, we're creating that culture of appreciation and recognition. And I think that's the important thing is that we recognize and appreciate and we see other people for who they are. And that's the true value of a strength-based culture, in my view, is that we are kind of looking beyond ourselves. We're appreciating the fact that other people turn up in a different way. And there actually may be something to learn from that and leverage from that as well. Any thoughts on that from folks? Anything else you would add to that?
Well, I think there's expanding perhaps that relationships piece around customer, so appreciation of customer and understanding customer,
Yeah.
and partners as well. I think there's I've started to see some threads in the literature about that. That sense of customer service, picking up on what you were saying about the empathy and the altruism to the customer engagement as well, or partner, or engaging with partners and suppliers.
Yeah.
So I think there's a base there of the relationships, and then how do we expand that further?
And I think the work that we've been doing more and more around the remote people, remote workers, people who aren't or maybe completely remote, is the the impact it's having on relationships at home, where, the work and home are very close, and it's sometimes very hard mentally to turn yourself off between work and home, particularly when you maybe have children, your partner's working at home as well. So it's helping foster that more appreciative inquiry, being more curious, for example, being more open to different ways, different stresses, and different approaches. Great. So, what do personal strengths then bring? And I think there's a few of them. I think improved communication is one. I think we're facilitating a deeper connection with people, and ensuring that we feel heard, but we're also willing to listen to others. I think we're enhancing more of that empathetic communication. We're not putting a value on an overvalue on our own strength. We're looking to be more appreciative of the range of strengths that others bring and how they can complement each other or complement you. I really like this concept of extending out emotional literacy. And it's some work that I've been reading that I've been doing is like when we start to extend out that and we recognize our own emotions, we're more effective at recognizing them in other people as well. And I think it's still a growing or maturing area around emotional literacy, particularly in a corporate environment and in some cultures. We're talking about emotion, talking about feelings, talking about well-being isn't really readily done or discussed. So extending out kind of the language and the um, vocabulary that we have around emotional literacy, I think, is really important. We are then looking at conflict and reframing conflict, I think. So we looking more from conflict to collaboration and saying, well, actually, yes, it's okay for us to disagree. We have different viewpoints. We come at things from a different perspective. But actually, what are we trying to solve here? So we move away from the disagreement to a resolution. So how do we reach that agreement? How do we resolve that dispute? And I think when we have improved empathetic communication, we've got stronger emotional literacy, then conflict resolution becomes that little bit easier. Now, no one likes conflict. I get that. It's not a comfortable space for most people unless you've got a confrontation score of 10. Then it's always going to be it's always going to be at some level of discomfort. But I think having a strength-based approach and being more curious and inquiring allows us to negate some of the negative aspects of that. I think the other part then we start to look at that the tailored support and those development pathways. So we don't always sit in the ideal role or the ideal environment. What a person, a strengths helps us do is really understand where we are and what our preferences are and what's required of us in our role and our relationships and the environment that we're working in. And that allows us then to understand those that capability or that conscious flexibility that we can create in order to fill the gap or understand what we need in order to do that. So those tailored support ways or more conscious support and development pathways become a really critical aspect of a strength-based culture. Because we're not saying that there's no development. What we're saying is that we're a bit more conscious about the development that we need and how can we look at it and leverage from our own space, our own starting point in order to address that. Then we start to build people with so the idea of reliability and honesty and authenticity comes in here as well, building trust and rapport. So when we're coming from a place of authenticity, we're often building more rapport with individuals and we're building trust with those individuals. We're more honest in what we can achieve and what we can't achieve. And I think some people may call that, vulnerability, for example. We talk a lot about that as leaders at the moment. But I think it's a really important aspect, which is we build trust and rapport when we are demonstrating honesty and authenticity. And we can do that when we understand who we are and how we like to work. And we're clear about that as well. And that we put our hand up and go, that's not my wheelhouse. I don't do that very well. I need support in order to do that. It's not my area of motivation. It doesn't energize me as well. From that, we can create better social awareness and engagement as well. We're looking up and beyond ourselves. That emotional literacy, the willingness to be more empathetic and being more curious helps us better engage more socially with other people around us. And then obviously it's going to drive engagement, accountability for our own engagement, not to be entertained at work or the organization or your leader there to, drive that motivation. But this takes a personal accountability, bringing that forward. This is how I like to work. This is what I'm good at. This is where the support is required, for example. And then the the one that the second one I like out of this list, and I was sitting at Dallas Airport last week when I wrote this and reading a whole heap of stuff, and I was just thinking, well, actually, as I looked around, and particularly in some of the environments that I've been traveling around, this enhanced perspective taking has become really an interesting topic, I think. Um, and being able to kind of step aside and step back from my own point of view and look at, okay, well, what does that mean for other people? What are those other strengths that I could be leveraging? How do I um, maybe put some stuff down around my ego or, my own expectations, my own things about myself, and extend out that and navigate that a little bit more fully. So I'm able to um, look across more of the emotional landscape and look across the requirements of that and kind of put my hand up and go, yeah, I need to extend out a little bit more. I need to enhance what I'm looking for and looking at without as much bias. And I think then, ultimately what we're doing is increasing inclusivity. We appreciate that diversity is a fact. That inclusivity comes with an action. And I think generally when we start to work from a base of personal strengths or being more strengths, having a strengths culture, what we're doing is appreciating the value of inclusivity and diversity as a mechanism for performance and well-being. Anything you'd add to that list? It's quite a solid list, but anything in your own experience that you would add to that?
I would add, or not so much add, but emphasize, Glenn, the confidence you get when you have a better awareness of the strengths that you bring to the
Yeah,
table.
yeah,
Um, I think I wrote about this in a blog a few months ago, but
right.
I I remember very distinctly an occasion where I was asked by a board to do a detailed business case, and prior to knowing my facet five, I would have agreed to that because it was my job, and I would have had a miserable couple of weeks and
Yeah.
lost weekends, and so on.
Mm,
But knowing my facet five, I was sort of confidently able to say to them, well, I can see, yes, we do need a detailed business plan, but that's not actually my strength. It's not what I
yeah.
bring to the table.
Yeah.
I bring relationships and the academic excellence of the courses we're developing. And I suggest we get someone from outside and I'll give them the information. And, surprise, surprise, they just all totally agreed. There was
Yeah.
absolutely no pushback from that. But if I hadn't understood my Facet 5 profile,
Mm.
I wouldn't have had the confidence to just say, no, stuff it, I'm not doing that job.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had a conversation this morning on a masterclass this morning with the guys in Europe, and one of the ladies she said sometimes it's like pushing a round circle through a square hole, and then actually when you realize what your strengths are, actually if you turn that circle on its side, you can still get it through that square hole. We're just looking at things through in a different way. We're taking a different perspective. And actually, I think you're right. I think we're just a little bit more honest about what motivates us, what we're good at, uh, and sometimes what the result will be. For me, if you ask me to do a whole heap of detailed numbers, I'm not that person. I can tell the story around them, but I'm not going to be the person who's going to make sure that 1 + 1 = 2. It always ends up at 2.5 or some other random number that I then have to go and justify. So I think you're right. I think we become more confident, both in how we like to work, what we can achieve, but also we put our hand up and going, that's I'm not the best person for that. Rob, you were going to.
I just that summary thought about it's not all about me. Building on David's point about, well, I know where I shine and I know where I don't.
Mm.
And so there's an emotional maturity almost, or a stage in adult development about, well, I know who I am and I know what I can do, and
Mm.
the connection then to other team members, and reinforcing what you were saying before about the appreciation and the perspective taking.
Mm.
I think that's a positive feedback loop, that we can tap into and make
Yeah.
it more.
And I think it's often part of the teaming work that we do, maybe with line dance or getting people up and appreciating the different approaches to the same concept or the way they like to work across our scales, whether it's will or emotionality or whatever it might be. Really does help. The outcome of that is people have a different perspective from other people. They're hearing different ways and approaches and methods that they may not thought of before or felt like they could access and access different styles within the group. And I think this is really important for leadership just at the moment. Leaders in some areas still have to have all the answers. Teams do look for them to solve some of the problems. So I think this can really help with helping individuals both be a bit more um, accountable, maybe, and also for leaders to be able to go, yeah, actually, I'm a great facilitator of the solution, but I might not have all the right answers. But I'll try to ask the right questions in that approach. Yeah, great. So let's have a look just then at some of the business advantages. Obviously, there's a whole range of things that businesses will benefit from that. Some of the work that we've been seeing with Gallup, for example, they're saying that there's, up to a 10 to 19% increase in organizational performance. When employees are leveraging their strengths, they're likely to be more energized and more effective in their roles. Um, Again, work by Gallup around employee engagement, discretionary effort. And I'm just reading some numbers here as I wrote them down the other day, which is it can typically double from around 30% to 60% higher engagement linked closely to higher productivity, better retention rates, improved profitability. So Gallup tend to be doing a lot more work in this space, and they're very well suited to that work. And the numbers that they're turning up with, you kind of have to double check sometimes. You go, surely they can't be doubling those rates through one initiative. We've been trying that for how many years now? Apparently the strength-based culture is helping with that. Obviously, improve employee retention. The Centre for Creative Leadership did a study and they got a 15% increase in employee retention through helping with not only understanding strengths, but job alignment and role alignment, and creating that culture of appreciation in organizations. They're looking at Gallup was saying that there's a strength-based management processes or practices boosted up to 29% increase in profit. And that's mainly through productivity and the customer focus that you spoke about before, Rob, and reduced turnover and absenteeism. Say that very quickly 3 times as well. So big numbers and better team dynamics, better collaboration, less and more cross-business collaboration and cross-business team dynamic improvements, not just sitting within the same team, but a willingness to stretch out across process lines, across business departments as well. And as you mentioned before, improve customer outcomes. I think it's operates from that strength perspective. We're enhanced perspective taking, looking at it and being more responsive to customers and being more proactively responsive to customers as well. So they're big hikes in the business. And my question probably is, why do we or do you think we have a resistance to a strength-based culture? Um, if we're getting these sort of numbers in organizations. Is that your experience, or do you find that organizations are quite open to talking about a strength-based approach? I'll give my personal experience is the organizations that we're talking about when we say performance management isn't really a great way of motivating staff. They kind of ask me to get up and leave the room and take my stuff with me. So talking about strength-based culture still is a little bit too far removed for them. Any thoughts?
Definitely, as you said, tradition and
Mm,
history. I think that's that shared experiences and education around. Well, you need to identify the weakness and work on the weakness. And Seligman back
mm,
20 odd years, 25 years ago, did a great service to us all on that. I think there's that, but then there's whether or not there's inertia and
mm,
perhaps a lack of skill, or they can see that there's a whole new series of investments and skill building and capability development that is attached to that, and it's almost easier to dwell in the space that you're in rather than make
mm.
that. I
Often
think there's a bit of that. I
you're
think there's a bit
getting
of that.
rewarded for the behavior that you've already got in
Yeah,
place. So unless we change the reward and the metric to the not so much the what all the time, but more of the how, and this becomes part of that metric, then obviously, why would you do something that you is going to be counterproductive to your having a well-paid job, for example, or a bonus, is
yeah,
sometimes what we're hearing.
yeah.
Yeah, very
And the
good.
risk appetite more generally, I think.
Yeah, and I think in some cultures, some organizations, their risk appetite is a bit higher, but it does take a lot of effort in order to do that. So, what's the role of personality and strengths? And I trot this slide out just about every time I have a conversation. So, for those who haven't seen it, or those who have, my apologies. So, when we talk about personality and strengths, we're talking about an individual's personality, those trait or enduring characteristics of personality. And we know that they drive our behavior. And when we're on a default mode or an autopilot, what we basically get is these shortcut neural pathways. Our brain has created these quick fixes and quick routes to getting things done. And those behaviors kind of create a set of default outcomes for us. So we're not thinking about them, we're just going about doing them. But they don't always provide us with the best outcome. And what we're doing here is just adding in a level of self-awareness and understanding now that we're actually being more conscious in the behaviors and being more conscious about who we are and how we like to work, so that we're choosing different behaviors and we're getting different outcomes. So this is all about making things a bit more conscious. So if you think about the four phases of conscious competence, so we go from unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. We move into conscious incompetence, and it's those moments of going, actually, there's a lot for me to know. I don't know as much as I thought I did. And really, what we're trying to do with a strength based area is to say the shift into conscious competence is easier on a strength based level because these things should be easier accessible, more easily accessible to you. So we can bring them forward, inspect them, color them in a bit more, polish them, and put them back with a bit more competence. So the idea is of a strength based culture for us and the role of personality is just making that unconscious more conscious for a little while, inspecting it, understanding the context that it's turning up, and ensuring that it's turning up in the best way possible. And of course, that's all in relationship to the context, the time and support you've got, the process and the tools, all those cultural elements that wrap around and influence everything from micro things such as, email signatures to how people run meetings. There's a whole range of elements that will affect our behaviors. And as we just spoke about, some of those things we do because they're the way we do things around here, and that's what we get rewarded for. So the great thing then that we've been facilitating a lot more of in organizations is this concept of conscious flexibility. So when we understand ourselves, and at the heart of conscious flexibility is self-awareness. So the idea about conscious flexibility is that we're understanding our strengths, so we know our preferred tendencies, how they impact our behavior and our performance. So we're putting in that understanding level in between our personality and our behavior. We recognize when our context or our situation requires us to flex a little bit further beyond our preferred style, and we're stretching responsibly or we're stretching consciously into those new behaviors. But we know where we're starting from. And that's the key for me is if we're just being reactive, then we're not really understanding where we're starting from. Now, we can stretch as far as we want. And the further we stretch away from our preferred style, the more effort it's going to take, the more effortful we often say it's going to be. And sometimes then that reduces our efficiency, our efficacy, our well-being and resilience over that period of time. And we do that consistently, that can be very draining. So what we're saying is when we understand our strengths, we understand the context that we find ourselves in, we have a more conscious approach to how we fill those gaps. Now, we may be able to say, like David said, that's not my gig. I don't do that. Pass it over to somebody else, get rid of it. But in the majority, when we're at work, we're figuring out how far we need to stretch from our preferred style, and then what that means for us and for the work. When we think about some of the values, the value of having that more conscious flexibility, and we're taking accountability for that, is what we're recognizing is where we may over rely on a set of strengths and we overplay those. The old saying, when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. What we're doing is just being more conscious of the approach that we're taking. With practice, then it enables us to build more versatility in our approach. So just, we're building in skill, we're able to do that more naturally and more efficiently. It may still not be our preferred approach, but we're able to do it a little bit more easily. So that allows us to stretch beyond, different scenarios in different roles, different relationships and different challenges, just with that little bit more ease than we would have had before. It enhances collaboration, it fosters that stronger team dynamics by encouraging individuals to align their approach with the needs of others or to be able to leverage others and their style as well. And it helps us, I think, navigate that complexity, building up that flex beyond our natural strengths. It helps us, again, build that our ability to manage complexity more than anything, build our ability to be more resilient, uh, uh, build our self-efficacy, and that we can stretch and it's okay, and we have survived and we've come back. And again, if we keep doing that, we're building a a more conscious habit of our understanding how our strengths turn up, but also we're recognizing what it takes from us and how we might need to flex into uh, changing contexts around us, role, requirement, relationship, society, all of those sort of things. Any thoughts on that concept?
So, Greta, for me, it makes me think of situational leadership, which is
Yeah.
sort of a sort of idea that there, although that sort of takes me back to not so much a strength base, because if you're applying situational leadership, then you need the strengths of, well, you need the skills and competencies of each of those leadership styles. So if you're
Mm,
applying that model, you can't just say, well, I don't have a strength in coaching, so I'm not going to apply that leadership style.
yeah.
You would actually have to develop the skill and competency and have the flexibility to do that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I'd
but no,
agree.
I think
Yeah.
it sort of overlaps nicely on the situational leadership model and similar models.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. It's not too far away from that. What we're basically saying is, with the situational leadership model, you tend to have a dominant or a more preferred mode, I suppose, that you start in, and you're having to flex that. Just like kind of the Thomas Kilmann model, for example, where you're flexing into different conflict modes, is we'll have a primary approach, and then we just don't have the privilege in our jobs anymore, I think, to not be able to do that. And what we're saying is how far do you have to go and what do you need in order to do that? And how far is too far?
I think in both of those instances, Grant, it goes back to your previous slide where
Mm.
have a personality and a behavior, and the awareness and understanding intervenes. So both in situational leadership and in the Thomas Kilmann stuff,
Mm.
you've got a situation where your personality will push you in one or two directions, but
Mm.
once um, conscious understanding in the middle, then you have that at least knowledge that you should be able to flex in a couple of different ways.
Yeah, and that you might just need to build skill, and that skill could come from formal
Yeah.
learning, from mentoring, from coaching, just throwing yourself in the deep end, making a heap of mistakes, learning as you go. I think there's a whole range of different ways, preferred on your basic style. Mine's always been throw myself something at it and then go and lick my wounds later. So, how do we cultivate conscious flexibility then? I think the first part is that reflection part, which is, identifying our preferred approach. It's understanding how we like to approach our work, our natural motivators and energizers, and recognizing those tasks and moments that stretch or demotivate us as well. So we've got a good sense of what draws us in and what repels us. I think then the context becomes important. So, in the context that we find ourselves, what are those elements that I can leverage more of? What do I find I'm doing quite easily that I can reframe or reuse? And then what are those areas that I need to be more conscious of and create understanding around that I might need to have a new approach? Practice makes perfect, as they say. So, practicing intentional flexing, using creative ways to leverage your own style. As I said before, you can push a round circle through a square hole just by turning it around or looking at it in a different perspective, and it will go through there. So, it's how do we reframe the skills that we've got? A great example would be if you're a high energy person, for example, and you're great at motivating and engaging people, you might be able to use that same energy in a different way, in a more structured way of driving, planning, and implementation that you might not have seen before. So it helps us leverage also the complementary skills that we might find in our team and team members, and we're co-mentoring and supporting each other in that process. Then I think we've got a better sense of and as you said, David, that situational leadership, we didn't then have to develop and we have to have some capability in those areas. And what we're saying is how much and in what direction do you need to develop? And obviously it's kind of like a starburst, isn't it? Different contexts, different requirements. We're always building skill and we should be open to that. What we're saying is that we can start from a particular position and understand what skill actually is going to be helpful. And the last one is then feedback, both, the good old Johari window of seeking feedback and giving, information through disclosure. I think that approach helps us understand how we're turning up, how that conscious flexing is going. Is it turning up well, or is there still more skill required as well? And I think you can just use it in terms of how you're turning up more generally, where you think a strength is turning up really well and you're getting feedback. Actually, it may be a bit overplayed, or it's not the right strength for the right time. So let's talk about some strategies then to create a strength-based approach. Like most things, it starts with leadership, in my view. So when we start with our leaders, who are sharing their strengths, and how they're applying them. They're recognizing and rewarding strengths in others. They're making decisions and resource planning based on strengths. Then we've got a stronger platform. So we're leading from the front around a strength-based language. We're demonstrating that with our leadership. The other part is obviously you need some way of talking about and measuring personality to uncover those strengths. So we're not saying that your personality drives all of your strengths. We're just saying that it's a foundation from which you can then discover others. You can create that broader lexicon, that broader language around strengths as well. By having a kind of framework around that, you can then start to collect those together and go, well, actually, my goal focus, what does my goal focus and high vitality do for me? It makes me very good at X, Y, and Z. So we start to use that as an enduring language that others understand as well, and that we then can use to uncover other strengths and create more commonality around personality. The other thing that we can start to do is align, our strengths with roles, whether we're redesigning roles, for example, or we're providing opportunities for employees to move roles or do role participation, and helping them align some of their areas, or they're, working in project teams, for example, that allow them to leverage some of those strengths and demonstrate those. Or if they're in that consciously flexible mode where they're learning from other people as well, they're getting some mentoring and coaching, they're getting on-job skill development and feedback in the moment. Just like the all change processes, then you need to integrate that into organizational practices, whether that's recruitment, for example, whether that's performance reviews, whether that's team building initiatives, all of those sort of small micro practices that we have on a day-to-day basis all need to start using a strength-based language. And I think it's, in our team, we use that in trying to understand what we're leveraging right now. What do we need to call on this week, for example? What are we looking from other people to support us in the work that we're doing? So it doesn't have to be a huge plan. It can just be sort of those, again, those little micro habits that we're creating where we're putting language and describing how we like to turn up and what we need from others. The important thing then is we're getting, creating that language through that measurement of personality. We're talking about what those strengths look like and feel like and how they're demonstrated. And actually, we're giving regular feedback on how they're turning up. So it does require a little structure around psychological safety and a few other things for that to turn up, of course. But the interesting thing here is that when we start to recognize it in other people, it's more likely to be demonstrated. So peer feedback, and as they say, if you're going to want to create a habit, then tell somebody outside of your family, you're more likely to stick with a habit. If you're telling a peer or somebody you work with, they're more willing to keep you accountable. The other aspect then is promoting a continuous learning culture and development culture. So while there's some idea that once you've got a strength, you don't need to do anything else and it kind of takes care of itself, what we need to create is that more open to learning, open to experience culture, and not only openness, but provide that as well through that. The organizational practices through aligning strengths or giving opportunity for people for development. And the thing that we don't do well, I think in most cases, is just celebrate success. It's calling those small things out, recognizing when somebody is doing something well, and actually when they have stretched out of their comfort zone or they're stretching their style as well. Now, whether that's actually turned up well or not, it's the recognition, I think, is the really key thing here. Is I recognize that, with my low control, I'm trying to do something of high control. I haven't done it very well, but the effort is there, the intention is there, and it's not giving everybody a certificate just for turning up, but it is recognizing the value of effort and that somebody is trying. Any other things that you would add in to create strategies for a strength-based approach in your own experience? Metrics is the other thing that we would need, start measuring what you measure gets done type of thing. Reward differently would be another one from our conversation earlier. You need to start rewarding people for doing these things. So it's embedded into that organizational practices. Anything else you'd add in?
I just want to try and unpack with you just a little bit now about
Mm,
the start piece uh, in terms of introducing anything new from a organisational practice perspective.
mm,
I'm talking HR, where I sit,
yep.
to get folk at the top where
Mm,
I'm close to organisationally, but you need to have senior leadership directors, so on, championing the cause. I mean, is there anything that you'd say there in terms of how a business case can best be made?
yeah, it's a great one. I think the way we've been talking about it is um, doing kind of the reverse and understanding some of the issues that they've got and how a strength-based culture may be able to attend to that.
Mm-hmm.
We often talk about collaboration or poor communication or conflict or people not being able to access different styles or taking different approaches. So we tend to start with that moment of those aha moments in a teaming session, for example, and we look across the line dance between 1 to 10 on a particular factor, and we start that conversation around look at the diversity of styles you've got here. What if you were to be able to harness all those styles and the positive aspects or the strength-based aspects of those in solving the problems that you're facing now? So it's if we try to flip it to really understand the problem that they're facing, and then it's not easy because it kind of has to be that raindrop theory, which is, okay, well, how about you practice this? How about you make small changes? The demonstrable change, then the demonstrable effect, I think, is the most powerful thing. The experience of that is one of the most powerful things.
Yeah, okay. I'm thinking from the individual development
Yeah.
perspective, that's probably a way to hit it. Do you mind just going back one slide?
Yeah, of course.
There was something in there which just made me think how, from that bottom up point of view,
Mm,
our team leaders and so forth could be helped. Yeah, no, it's cool.
yeah.
That's probably the way I think for
Mm,
me to look to do it from the ground up in terms of using individuals, developing them, and seeing what sort of cascades up in terms of people seeing the result in individual cases, and
yeah.
then helping that to reform other individuals, and that's all very sort of postmodern way of change. All right, cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think when, the thing that if I come down, the celebrating success, the peer recognition, and again, because it starts with leadership, if you can get a leader talking about their strengths and how they go about approaching things, using it from a perspective of learning and demonstrating that, but also calling out actively other people and their strengths, that's a really powerful motivator. They have to lead by example. So it takes one person to start that or initiate that or catalyze that. Uh, I think, um, it, and we spoke about it early on, is the concept of talking yourself up, I think, is a real barrier with strengths-based culture, which is if I'm talking about what I'm good at and how I like to work, we kind of have that tall poppy syndrome, which is like, yeah, I think you're a bit too big for your boots, and we like to have people in their place. So we've got to overcome that perspective and really change the culture around how do we help people really express who they are in a positive, strength-based way that adds value to other people, not just the bragging or ego or whatever it may be, but actually talking about what they can contribute. Any thoughts from Rob or David and Richard in the work that you're doing? You're all working with teams on a regular basis.
So something that jumped out when you're talking about the tall poppy. I thinking about all the American our colleagues Elizabeth and Monica might talk to it. I think the Americans are a lot happier talking about their strengths than in the English tradition.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That I think that's a really it still resonates culturally that that's something that we don't do.
Hmm.
One way I like to try to do it at that individual level, just picking up on the earlier point with the leader or with the senior leaders, is really stroking their egos about, well, helping them understand what they've got,
Mm.
and why they're successful, and understanding that the strengths-based approach about, well, what is your recipe for success? And then how can we enhance that? How can we double down on that? How can we sweat the assets? How can we get more out of that for the individual?
Mm.
And then that opportunity to expand, explore and expand that for the group or the team or whatever, what
Mm.
have you. I think that's worked well for me over the years about having that one-on-one with the top leader to be able to say, well, this is a way for you to understand why you're successful. I
Mm.
think that's a really unusual conversation for somebody to have.
Mm. Yeah. And I think then, I would say that ultimately depends on their personality. And I think
Of
if you're
course.
a promoter or an architect or somebody with lots of will and lots of energy, that's a natural conversation. I think if you're kind of the opposite to that, then that may not feel as comfortable. But I think the approach is still the same, which is how do you take those great skills that you've got and pass those on to other people? How do you enhance that in the organization?
I was actually thinking when you were talking there, Grant, the other way, which is like yeah, we've got some junior people, so
Mm.
like using the career motivators to start to have discussions and think about like what's next
Yeah.
and building on their strengths.
Yeah.
Yeah, which like it's probably really obvious, but I never really thought of like utilizing the tool in that way to sort of think about what's next.
Yeah, I think it's a great use of that when you're giving them a language and a structure, I suppose, to that conversation around, what they're looking for, how they like to be led, what they're, looking for over a longer term in their career as well. I think that's a really empowering approach for individuals. Right. So what next for a strength-based culture? And I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm just going to come down because we've got just a little bit more time. So I moved this because I overspoke this morning. I'm going to have a quick conversation about some of the myths then very quickly, which are in that document, the ebook that I've written. Um, I think then the some of the myths, we've got five myths basically around taking a strength-based approach. That focusing on strengths means that you're ignoring weaknesses. Actually, in reality, it's just creating a balance of conscious development. We're not so much ignoring them; we're stretching into those areas. We're more aware of what our weaknesses are because they're probably not a preferred approach. We're seeking feedback, and we tend to be then thinking about how do we amplify the strengths, how do we change the shape of the circle to fit through that square. But we're also acknowledging some of those gaps. So we're moderating our gaps by understanding them more than anything. Um, the other one that I hear a lot is, oh, well, we've got all these strength-based culture. We don't need to do anything because they'll take care of themselves. I think, again, just because we've got a strength doesn't mean it's turning up well. And that still requires some skill and development practice around that in order to turn up well. So we need to kind of make that unconscious more conscious, polish it a bit more, put some skill around it, make sure it's turning up in the right way for the context that we find it in. Number three, strength-based cultures avoid difficult conversations. Actually, I think that it's the other way around. I think that a strength-based culture encourages feedback because you're seeking to do a better job. You're seeking feedback from other people. You're seeking different perspectives. You're being more curious and empathetic in your approach. So you're starting to create more constructive feedback mechanisms for individuals, looking to how you can leverage other people and how you can stretch more consciously and how you can develop your strengths through that feedback process. Number four, focusing on strengths mean avoiding risks. Um, Similar to number one, I think the reality is that when we're when we think about conscious flexibility as a concept, we're encouraging people to be more conscious of the risks that they're prepared to take and what they need in order to do that safely. So we're moving away from just jumping into something, but being more conscious about the process that we're going through, and therefore we probably tend to put more mitigants in to make sure that we are successful. No guarantees, of course, but I think it's just again that conscious conscious making approach that we're using from a strength base, we've got a better understanding of the entirety of that risk. And if you're low emotionality, for example, where everything's pretty good and you don't need to worry too much and you don't worry too much, that conscious flexibility allows you to kind of move up, maybe up that scale a little bit more in order to understand what could go wrong, the may happens as well. And then number five, strength-based cultures guarantee universal success. And I think if that was the case, then we wouldn't have any problem implementing strength-based cultures, would we? And it's not the reality at all. It's just that they can be more impactful when we are, and as we saw with the Gallup and the Center for Creative Leadership numbers, when we do them well, we can shift the dial on on an organization. But it's not a direct hit on the bottom line. It's a more of a matrix or catalytic approach that we're seeing across organizations in enhanced performance, in health, enhanced well-being, reduce absenteeism, greater discretionary effort. All of those sort of things come from that, which drive success over a longer period of time. Any other myths that you've heard along the way?
Maybe that it's something that people want, because sometimes people like working on weaknesses.
Yeah, yeah, true. That actually, yeah, I think that probably number six is that working on our weaknesses makes us a better leader or a better employee. I think it's kind of the opposite, isn't it? In some ways, which is like if we're more conscious about what their gaps are, yes, that will actually help us, but we have to understand what the gap is. And so therefore we need to understand how we prefer to approach things, what our strengths are, and then understand where we're stretching to. Um, and we spoke about early on, Richard, just before you joined, was that we've grown up in a culture of development being weaknesses and being risks and having to fill those gaps, kind of that dysfunctional disease model of development, uh, where we relate development to fixing a problem as opposed to development, which is kind of leveraging a strength in order to reduce the risk, manage weaknesses, create opportunity or success. So some strategies for leaders, and the document that I mentioned before, we put a few down here, but just very quickly, there's a whole range of different things that we can do to support leaders, and some of those are modeling strengths application, for example. So highlighting how people are using them, how they're addressing challenges with them, making decisions, achieving results. It could be as simple as conversations around. Uh, One of the strengths could be high will, and they're very effective at decision making, but how they can then use that in order to be more inclusive in that approach with the rest of the team. So we called out our strength. Here's what I do very well, and here's how I'm being more conscious about applying that, so it's not overplayed. That I'm recognizing that when I do overplay, that I can exclude people rather than include them. We're encouraging strength-based feedback with individuals. So we're recognizing and aligning team members' strengths to uh, activities that could be in one-to-one meetings, it could be in team meetings, it could be through written communication, a whole range of different things. But it's encouraging that strength-based feedback, which is, how am I going? How are you seeing me turning up? What could I do, dial up or dial down in the work that I'm doing with you? I have those in my one-to-one conversations. What should I stop doing? Do you think I should stop doing that's impacting you? What should I do more of that would be supportive of you? Now, I can't always guarantee what I can do more of is aligned to what I naturally like doing, but it means that I've got a better understanding of what's required in my role. I think then we can help as leaders challenge comfort zones, so we can recognize them when somebody is kind of sitting comfortably in their strength and not extending beyond, and maybe that is impacting their performance and impacting their role. So we can challenge that by drawing them out a little bit further. We're not asking them to kind of go from a 1 to a 10 or a 10 to a 1, but we're incrementally pulling them out of that and stretching that with skill and opportunity and support. We're celebrating those strengths. We're calling those strengths out in action, and I think that's a really important thing. Is that when we celebrate those, um, we're highlighting the value that we're putting on those actions. We're highlighting the contribution. We're changing kind of the narrative around what we value in the how we do things around here as well. And as we had mentioned before, those sort of solving the problems, getting those sort of advocacy, getting that demonstrated is a way to start to shift that change cycle for implementing strengths. And I think it's in how do we create more open conversations that should be really about strengths so that we create a culture of people feel comfortable discussing their strengths, also discussing the flex or the gap that they're working in at the moment. I think David, you gave a great example where you kind of put your hand up and said, "Yeah, that's not my thing. I don't like you're better off getting somebody else come and do that for you to get a better result." I think then we're creating that openness to that. That does require a few things in place, I think, around psychological safety, that we're not getting retribution, we're not getting marked down or being seen less as because of having that conversation. Um, as well. And then I think number six is around creating those opportunities for individuals. So if somebody's coming in with their career motivator, as Richard was saying, then we've really got to provide an opportunity for them in order to do that. And it's otherwise we're finding that people will come in, they kind of hit a wall of opportunity and they'll go somewhere else. They'll leave the organization. So you get higher attrition. And overall, I think you get lower motivation from employees. And then leading with flexibility, I think, is the last thing, which is how are your strengths actually contributing um, to the situational demands of the team and the work. So while you may have a strength, you can then talk about actually, while my strength is being quite creative, I'm going to have to lean into or stretch into something and being a bit more disciplined over the next week because I've got a lot of structured work to do. So that means it's going to come from that energy is going to be dialed down from other places. The My focus is going to be there, and it may feel a bit more inauthentic to people around me and to myself. But what I'm demonstrating is I'm leading with that flexibility in order to meet the requirements of the context, the situation, or the role. Very good. So let me go back up a couple of slides then. So what we've got is the opportunity, obviously, for people to. We've got the ebook which we've written out. It's just a bit more long-winded than the conversation that we've had this evening or this morning, and we'll send that out. And it's just on the role of personality in a strength-based culture. If you haven't got a key qualities report and you'd like yours, then we just need your written permission in the chat. You can just put your name and email address and we'll get that out to you. And that will give you a really nice view of what your strengths are, how you like to turn up and how you can leverage those, but also where you might need to look at, when you're overplaying those strengths as well. And what we'll do is we'll send that to you via your MyFacet 5 web account so you can get to see that as well.
One thing that occurred to me in that previous question was a conversation I had with someone recently who was about to be taking over a directorship and with a volatile crew. So we were going through his Facet 5 and his strengths and then mapping that against the challenges that he might have with particular members of the organization he was joining. Looking at his strengths and mapping them against the specific challenges that he might have with individuals and working out a strategy for dealing with those individuals. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. It's often that conflict of styles, isn't it? When we approach something in a quite different way to other people, and we create a judgment around that. And I think about my high determination for people I feel who've low determination, who I feel just procrastinate and kind of put up barriers, or my high vitality and not being able to draw out enthusiasm out of people. Unless I'm really conscious about that, then actually I find I can exclude them quite quickly as well.
Yeah. Well, I think no, he initially was thinking of going in and trying to make a big impact on the first day, and then
Yep.
wasn't really his style. That was
Right.
more a thought of a cultural expectation. And in the end, he decided to go in, take a quiet leak, sit back, and
Yeah.
see what's happening, engage with people individually, which is his strength, and then start having a bigger impact after that.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, very good. Very good. So thank you very much for coming along. That's all I've got for you this evening. I'm really happy to answer any other questions or observations, whether these sort of conversations are valuable to you. We've got a whole year of them coming up of planned sort of masterclasses and keynotes. If you've got any topics that you'd like to hear about, then you can always let us know as well what's pertinent in your area just at the moment and what we might be able to contribute to. If you'd like to lead a conversation, that's even better. We're always happy to have people come on and have conversations for us. But otherwise, I will thank you for those people that put in their name and email address for the profile. That's great. We'll send out a copy of the strength-based guide for you as well, and you can access to this recording. It will take about a week by the time they process it and take out all the rubbish and leave all the good bits.